Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the pre-show. We're just getting everything set here. I hope everyone's having a great Saturday. You know, we weren't even really sure what was going to happen this morning. The power was out here in Morgan Hill. Let's see here. Let's get some of this stuff muted. Everything's looking good. I'm seeing we're up on YouTube. I'm seeing we're up on Facebook. Let me just check a few others. It is going to be a hot one this weekend. So I hope you're all ready for that. I don't know where it is on LinkedIn. Where are you? Not seeing it. Oh, there we go. It is up on LinkedIn. See, that's kind of handy. I'm using Restream here, and it's letting me go to a bunch of different potential locations here to verify that everything's streaming. We are... Well, that's interesting. It took me to a page on Twitter that is an old one. Definitely not the latest one. So we'll see what happens there. Yeah, there we go. It is, in fact, streaming on Twitter. And Twitter's just getting better all the time, so I hope folks are able to enjoy it there. If you'd like to participate in the actual chat, if you want to ask any questions, share any thoughts, that type of stuff, you're really going to need to participate in one of the other venues like Facebook or YouTube, I believe Twitch as well. But there is no chat connection between Twitter and the rest of it. I'll be doing my best to keep track of everything as we move through here. That's not always the easiest thing to do. I know last month we had some interesting chat shenanigans, and I'll make an effort to stay on top of that, because, you know, who needs the chat shenanigans, really? Interesting note, though, that's going to be coming up for, it's either going to be Monday or Tuesday for next week's podcast. For those of you who are also subscribers to the podcast, there was no show last week. I apologize for that. It's just too crazy of a week. I couldn't find the time to get it all done, but I did find the time to get an interview done, and I didn't want to rush the process of getting that put out because I think it's a really good one. I interview an amazing lawyer from the Pacific Legal Foundation where we get to chat about their recent successes with the Supreme Court relating to home equity theft, all those kinds of terrible things, and other things that they're working on. So make sure to check that one out. That'll be available on YouTube as a video podcast, but it'll also be the usual audio podcast that comes out on iTunes and iHeartRadio and Spotify and all the usual outlets. So feel free to check that out. We've got about 10 minutes until we're going to get going with the core of the show. We've got some interesting data to share. For those of you who joined me last time around, you know that we had the peak months, right? April and May are often the peak months. And we've had an interesting month in June because some of the declines that I would have expected given past years' performance at the same time of the year, we would have expected a little bit more of a decline with some numbers, but we didn't see that for all numbers. So we're getting a little bit more of a sustained higher season as it relates to some numbers, not all of them. We're going to go over all of those. And of course, we'll also talk about the usual local and national news that's affecting real estate. And we'll also do a quick review of the interest rates that we're currently facing, those types of things. So feel free to come along and join me in the conversation. I hope you've got your favorite cup of coffee with you. I've already had my cup of coffee this morning. Things were crazy enough. I was trying to come up with backup plans on how I was going to do the show with no electricity. So unfortunately, I went and got my coffee super early and managed to just down it all while I was coming up with my backup plan. And then just as the backup plan was ready to go, the power turned back on. And that was, I don't know, around 8:30, 8:45 this morning. But now the power's back, but who knows? Maybe it'll go out again while we're actually in the middle of the show, which would be the kind of thing the universe would want to rain down on you, I think. I'm seeing all the numbers look good across the board. Look at that. All nothing but green lights. Very nice. We've got about 9 minutes till we're going to get kicked off here. Feel free to drop any comments or questions. Let me just take a quick look here and see if it's all. So the only places you're going to be able to get, I can only read if you're doing a comment on LinkedIn. I'll be able to see your comment or your question, but you won't be able to see anything I respond back with, which is fine because if you're watching the show, I'll obviously just verbally respond to your question. On YouTube and Twitch, you'll be able to ask questions directly, and also on Facebook. I do have to keep 2 chat windows open to cover everything, but I've done that before, so I'm not real worried about it. So we'll just see how that goes. As I said, it's going to be a hot one this weekend. In fact, I think there was even a county-wide warning that went out for high temperatures. So I hope everybody is ready for that. This is always the time of year when folks' air conditioning units start to go nuts because suddenly there's a lot of high demand and there's a lot of demand on the system within your house. I hope everyone has taken the time out during the downtime to either clean everything up, get everything ready to go for the hot season. If not, you may end up finding yourself waiting a little longer than you want to for someone to come out and service your air conditioning. I had a fan on when I first turned on the stream here at 9:45 because my office is now the one room where the air conditioning is not pushing air. I have actually I could try turning it on and see if it has magically fixed itself. Let's see. We'll see if that's a thing. It works everywhere else in the house, but it's one of those deals where the venting that is controlled by the demand of the thermostat doesn't work to this room. So when I turn it on to come here, the flap just doesn't open in the venting to come to this room. So it's perfect that the one room where I've got lights on and I've got computers running and everything's generating heat is the one room I can't get any air conditioning in. Oh, but I am hearing air coming out. Well, that's good news. Let's close windows and hope for the best. Let's hope it's even cold air. We'll be starting in just a little over 5 minutes. Feel free to put, if you've got any, one of the other things we're going to cover, foreclosure numbers are making an interesting pivot, which I think was expected. If you've been someone who's listened to my podcast in the past or attended previous coffee and real estate events, you know we've talked about foreclosures a bit and how since the moratoriums are over and there's likely going to be sort of a resurgence or maybe not a resurgence, but sort of a peak in foreclosures. What's interesting is we've got some foreclosures that have been around for well over 1,000 days, which is normal, right? You would expect that when you've had a backlog of them accumulate over a certain period of time. But it's also the new foreclosures. Those are the ones that are most concerning because usually what happens is you get something that goes into that first stage of foreclosure, like you're told that you're behind on your payments, right? And those are the ones that tend to then stick in that position for an extended period of time because the actual process of eviction can't happen, right? So you end up in a foreclosure for a very long time. What's interesting is the uptick in the number of first notices, those first entries into foreclosure territory. And what's also interesting is some of those locations are coinciding with areas that people are moving to. So it'll be interesting to see how that is. Now, none of these are local. None of these biggest numbers are really affecting our local market. But of course, the real estate health of the market overall is an interesting one to note too, to kind of compare how we're performing versus the rest of the country. And in most areas, we're not doing as well as the average in terms of how much have our prices come down, how low is our inventory, those types of things. We're about 5 minutes away from getting started. Welcome to it. I should be streaming for everyone here on all the various platforms. At least I have gone and verified, and it looks like that is the case. Just testing the chat. All right. Looks like I got to do that separately here for Facebook. And it looks like all that's working as well. We're just a few minutes away now from getting started. And what we'll do is we'll just jump right into the data. And if any of that generates any questions for you, questions or concerns, you want to know more about a specific area, just let me know. I'll be happy to run through the specifics for any specific communities. We're going to basically do Santa Clara County and then sort of drill down to San Jose, Morgan Hill, and Gilroy so that we're looking at communities of different size. Oddly enough, the air conditioning did start and now it's turned off, but it hasn't reached the set temperature, so I'm not real sure what's up with that. Well, I'll stay optimistic and see if we can't get anywhere. Oh, do we have any interesting news items that we're going to cover that I might want to tease a little bit? So vacation homes or second homes, we'll have a little bit of tidbit on that I think is going to be good news for a lot of local people, because one of our most popular local regions for second homes has had a very interesting market change that might attract some folks who've been considering getting a vacation home. And I know with the way the working world works for an awful lot of folks, you could potentially go and stay in your second home or a vacation home or a cabin or whatever you've got, even during the work week. As long as you've got internet access, a lot of you are able to work from home during those times. So that might be an interesting tidbit for you. We're just about a minute away from getting started. I see across the platforms we've got a couple of people already joining us. Thank you very much for spending your valuable time with me on this Saturday. I hope it ends. I hope you're in a nice air-conditioned room and comfortable this morning, as things are supposed to get super hot here in the Bay Area. Not just today, but I guess for the entire weekend. If you've got any questions, please feel free to share them in the chat. I'm going to try to answer any questions that come up. For those of you who were around for last month's Coffee and Real Estate, we did have some unpleasant folks in the chat, so I tried to take care of that. I cranked up the knobs a little bit on filtering out the stupid stuff in chat, so hopefully we won't have a problem this time around. But if we do, we'll just push through like we did last time. It really didn't cause much of an issue. Just had to do a little extra clicking every now and then. But hopefully the information here is going to be useful for you, whether or not you're looking to just find out what's going on with the market around your home, or interested in finding out what your position is as a buyer. Hopefully we'll be covering some data that'll be useful for you to make better decisions, right? Because better information equals better decisions. Okay, it is 10 a.m. on the third Saturday of the month, so that means it is time for Coffee and Real Estate live chat. My name's Robert Whitelaw. I'm a local real estate broker and realtor right here in Santa Clara County. I've been doing this since 1988. I'm currently based out of Morgan Hill. If you are interested in finding out more about the value of your home, you can head right over to soldbyrobert.com. There's a tool right there on the front page that lets you input your address. And not only does it give you the value of your home, but it will also give you an amazing set of tools to evaluate your equity, where you stand with your mortgage, do what-if scenarios for refinancing or potentially tapping your equity. So feel free to take advantage of that. If you're not happy with it, just unsubscribe, no strings attached. But it's an amazing tool, and every year I do a review of the technology that I offer to my clients for them to be able to be as well informed as possible. And this is without a doubt the best one. It's called HomeBot AI. And for my money, it's the best tool out there. So feel free to check that out. Okay. Let's jump in. I don't want to waste your time. So let's go ahead and just jump in and start looking at the data. And this is for June of 2023. So we're looking at last month's data. And the first thing we're going to look at here, and I'm going to get my ugly face out of the way because who needs that, right? So what we're going to look at first are the total homes on the market, and we're comparing this to the same time last year. So we've got June of 2022 versus June of 2023. These are the two columns, and we can see we're comparing Santa Clara County, San Jose, Morgan Hill, and Gilroy. The county numbers, if you're trying to figure out to get a bigger picture perspective on it, Santa Clara County is obviously the best one from a data standpoint because it's just the volume of data, right? It has the largest numbers. So once you get into the thousands, your data is going to be more reliable than when you're in the dozens, right? And you see that we're kind of in the dozens when we're down to like Morgan Hill and Gilroy, where one outlier property or listing or anything like that can really throw off the numbers, specifically with things like listing price and that type of thing. But let's go ahead and jump in and just compare these. So in Santa Clara County, if we're looking at overall inventory, and just to remind ourselves, inventory is in the month of June, how many homes did buyers have to choose from? And how much competition did a home seller have, right? That's just the total number of homes that were out there. In Santa Clara County, in 2023, that number was 1,135, down from 2,163 last year. That's a 48% drop, so a substantial drop from the same time last year. In San Jose, that number was down 54%, with 1,101 homes available last year in June of 2022, and this year that number was down to 509. Which is just a ridiculously low number. I mean, it's you're having been doing this for so long, you're so used to San Jose having 1,000 or more homes available at any given time. This is just kind of a shocker. Morgan Hill was down 44%. We had 105 homes available last year. 59 homes were available this year. So inventory is ridiculously tight. And then in Gilroy, it was down 29%. We had 86 homes last year, 61 homes this year. And Gilroy is kind of an interesting one in terms of overall performance. Let me just switch my gaze here over to some other supplementary numbers. And we're going to see that in a few areas, Gilroy really did differently, right? In other words, in some categories where everyone else was negative, Gilroy was positive. And a lot of that, I think, has to do with pricing strategies and what buyers are trying to find for themselves. So we'll cover that in a second here. In fact, the very next slide is going to give us some insights into that. But let's just go ahead and continue with the numbers. All right, next is new listings. New listings simply represents the total number of homeowners who decided to list their home in that month. So this is when it showed up on the MLS, right? That's what controls what we see in the multiple listing service. So when you went on to Realtor.com or Zillow or Trulia or Redfin or any of these other websites, this is the month, right? June is when they showed up. So in Santa Clara County, the number was down 28%. We had 1,291 homes listed in the month of June of 2023, down from 1,784 in June of 2022. San Jose, negative 30, so down 30% from the same time last year. 645 homes listed for sale versus 914 last year. Morgan Hill, 50 homes listed this year, 87 homes listed at the same time last year. And here's one of the ones where Gilroy bucks the trend, where the number of homes listed compared to the same time last year was actually up 5% in Gilroy. 62 last year, 65 this year. Given the small sample size, that's almost a wash. But the fact that it is higher, I think, is worth noting, right? And it's one of those scenarios where my guess, I've had a couple of folks interested in potentially selling their home reach out to me from Gilroy. And it is simply because Gilroy has been getting more attention than other communities. And I think sellers are a little bit clued into that. And also because when you look at the numbers, one of the few places where homes are selling pretty robustly, I guess you could say, Gilroy is getting a lot of action. So I think sellers are getting into that zone of information and deciding that makes sense for them to jump into the market, potentially sell their home. In terms of homes sold, We've got some interesting numbers there for June of 2023. We can see that in Santa Clara County, we had 1,111 homes sold in Santa Clara County. And remember, the homes sold number is a little bit deceptive because they likely got the offer that they accepted in the previous month or in the previous 2 months, right? Because remember, when you buy a home, you make an offer, it gets accepted, and then it takes 30 to 45 days on average for it to close escrow. So this represents the closed escrow. It doesn't represent, we're going to talk about what does represent when the offer is accepted in a minute, but this is escrow closed, meaning the checks got written, the seller got their check, the bank funded it, all that stuff happened, ownership actually transferred, and escrow actually closed. So this represents homes where the offers were accepted in the previous month. They weren't, unless it was an all-cash deal where it only took a few days for escrow to close, they were not homes that sold in June. So 1,111 in Santa Clara County versus last year's 1,326 for a 16% decline from the same time last year. San Jose was a 17% decline with 556 homes sold this year, 670 sold last year. Morgan Hill down 21%, 45 homes sold this year versus 57 last year. And again, this one's a wash. Remember, we're talking about smaller numbers, higher variance in terms of reliability, right? 48 last year, 49 this year for a plus 2%. But it's interesting because there is no decline, right? I mean, even if we are just saying, let's look at the ballpark we're in here, we are seeing interest being maintained when compared to the same time last year. And I think that's reflected in some of these other numbers that we see. And I think it's also reflected in reasons why folks in Gilroy are potentially interested in listing their homes. They're seeing more activity and maybe a strike while the iron is hot kind of a vibe is going on. And I think that's why we're seeing a little bit more activity in that particular market. Next, let's go ahead and take a look at total months of inventory. This is how many months, if we were to freeze the total number of homes that sold in June and freeze the number of homes, how long would it take for those homes to get sold off, right? And months of inventory, typically nationally, when you're talking national headlines or what national folks in real estate assume, a healthy number is like 5.5 to 6.5 months. 5 to 6.5 months. That's considered a balanced market. Here, that number's a little lower. It's maybe 4.5 to 5.5 in my estimation. That's just my opinion as a guy who's been doing this for 35 years. But these numbers, no matter which of those two theories you subscribe to, this number is crazy low, right? I mean, look at Santa Clara County. First, it's down 38% from the same time last year, and it is 1 month. If everything froze, if the number of homes that sell and the number of homes on the market were to sell, we would sell off the entire inventory in 1 month, in 30 days. Last year, that number is at 1.6, which is still ridiculously low. So no matter how you slice it, these numbers alone would indicate an extremely lopsided seller's market. But it doesn't. It does a little. We're going to see numbers that indicate that it is a little bit. But remember, we're also coming off of the peak. The rest of the year should be downhill from here in terms of performance, as sellers would like it to be. In San Jose, we saw a 44% decline, less than a month, 0.9 months of inventory, 1.6 last year. Morgan Hill down 28% with 1.3 months of inventory versus last year's 1.8. And Gilroy, 1.2 months of inventory versus last year's 1.8 for a decline of 33%. So again, all of these numbers would suggest a strong seller's market that is not reflected in the rest of the numbers that we see. For some homes, yes, absolutely, there's a seller's market going on, but this would indicate almost feeding frenzy levels, right? That with inventory so low, but because we have such low demand, these do not end up equaling a crazy feeding frenzy market. Okay. Next, let's go ahead and look at homes pending and contingent. And just to explain what that is, when a seller accepts an offer, the first thing that happens is it usually goes contingent. And contingent means we've accepted an offer, but that offer has contingencies, meaning that the buyer can back out of the deal under the correct circumstances relating to the contingencies. Examples of that would be a 14-day inspection period, and let's say they get a home inspection, and the home inspection says this home is about to fall off of its foundations and it would cost $180,000 to fix that problem. Well, that would be a reason why the buyer could back out of a transaction without penalty, right? Because it has failed one of their inspections. Another is financing. If the financing doesn't come through and there's a financing contingency, then the buyer would be able to back out of that transaction without any penalty, right? But if the buyer were to back out of the transaction for any reason not covered by existing contingencies that hasn't been released yet, then they would be liable to have to surrender their deposit money. So this is the properties where the seller said, I accept your offer as it's written, right? So this would be a leading indicator of what we should see for sales in the following month, right? Because if you go pending or contingent this month, the odds are, unless something fails, that you're going to see that home closing in the following month. So we would expect this to be a reflection of the kinds of numbers, or give us a little bit of a crystal ball look into the numbers we should expect to see in July for closed escrows. So in Santa Clara County, this number was down 7%. We had 994 homes go pending versus 1,072 last year. And that's actually not very bad, right? Given the amount of homes sold variation we saw, this is actually not bad. So it tends to indicate that we should see things being fairly on par with last year's homes sold numbers, given the fact that numbers are so close, only 7% apart from each other. San Jose, 4% apart, 490 in June of 2023, 508 in June of 2022. So again, relatively flat, which would indicate we would tend to see homes sold numbers in the same range as last year. Morgan Hill, though, down 19%. 48 homes went pending last year. 39 went pending this year. Gilroy, up 20%. So we saw a net increase. 41 homes went pending last year. 49 homes went pending this year. And that's pretty good. Again, Gilroy showing more interest on the part of buyers, at least as it is compared to last year. And let's also keep in mind that not only is it more than last year, it's more than Morgan Hill. So more homes have gone pending in Gilroy than they have in Morgan Hill. And typically the way it goes, as I track the activity of buyers that I'm working with, and we've watched this migration happen. It's been an easy thing to watch, where someone will start their search and they'll be looking in San Jose, Sunnyvale, Almaden, South San Jose, etc. And then interest rates change. The purchasing power they have gets diminished because of interest rates or something else. And so, okay, now we're going to look in Morgan Hill. Nothing really enhances their volume of properties that are available to them. So now they push it down to Gilroy, and now they have more options available to them. And they start to see those homes and see that they don't have to reduce their expectations on what they were hoping for the home they were going to buy. They can reduce what they were going to spend based on the interest rate problems that they're facing and still get a home close to what they were hoping for. And they jump on it, and that's what happens. And we see a 20% increase in the total number of pending and contingent homes in the month of June for Gilroy. All right. Next, we're going to look at average original list price. And if you're someone who's been watching me do these for a while, you know that I do original list price for a very specific reason. An original list price reflects what the price was on the very first day it went on the MLS. This reflects the seller's mindset. This is what they originally signed on for when they signed that listing agreement with a real estate person. This is what they were shooting for. And this was what they expected. So it's a way to get inside the seller's head and try to figure out what were their expectations. What did they anticipate they would get if they were to sell their home and put on a list price on it. In the past, to calibrate you again, not last month, things have gotten very more rational over the last couple of months. But October, November, December, we were seeing crazy double-digit increases in this number in terms of expectations. And sellers were expecting crazy higher numbers for what they should be for their listing for their home, which ended up resulting in a lot of price reductions, right? A lot of homes staying on the market, obviously, and then getting a price reduction. Now, in Santa Clara County, this went up. And remember, this is expectations. This isn't what homes sold for. This is expectations. On average, sellers that listed their home expected to earn 2.4% more for their home than the same time last year. We saw that number at $1,880,129. Last year, that number was $1,835,241. San Jose, interestingly enough, was actually down almost 1%, down 0.9%. This year, $1,418,942 on average was the original list price. Last year, $1,431,587. So I think that is good. I think that the same or less number makes more sense given our current market, particularly where we are in this market right now, the one we're in July. So I think that makes more sense. Interestingly enough, Morgan Hill, which has historically been a community where these prices have been really nuts. I mean, for a long time, Morgan Hill was the lagging community where even when the county in general or San Jose or Gilroy were seeing not a lot of increases in this particular number or even decreases, Morgan Hill was seeing 10%, 15% increased expectations, which later resulted in greater price reductions in the marketplace. This month, very calibrated, I think, to reality with a reduction of 8.4% from the same time last year, where the average home in Morgan Hill was listed for $1,489,204. Last year, $1,625,088. Gilroy finally was down 3.1 from the same time last year, $1,226,275, down from $1,265,319. And just to sort of calibrate you here, let's see. And that's all at original list price. So that's all expectations. So now let's go ahead and take a look at what homes actually sold for. So as we look at these, we can see that the average sales price in Santa Clara County overall was up 0.2%. And the original list price was up 2.4. So on average, the county is still out of whack by about 2.2, right? 2.2%. But the number is 1,860,000 this year. Last year was 1,858,000. So very much a wash, right? Very much just the same as last year is sort of the reflection that we're seeing here. But overall, expectations versus what homes actually sold for, when you look at the average original list price and the average sales price, that's a $19,153 loss to sellers in terms of what they actually ended up getting versus their expectations. Now, San Jose is interesting. San Jose saw an increase in average sales price by 1.7% when compared to the same time last year. So we had $1,494,935 in San Jose. Last year, that number was $1,469,903. Again, a 1.7% increase. And what's interesting is that exceeded expectations because remember, San Jose's average original list price was down almost 1%, down 0.9. Overall, on average, sellers made $75,993 over their asking price, above what their original list price was. And remember, that's not compared to what it was listed for at the time the home actually sold. That is compared to original expectations of the sellers, right? So they were making more. And it's the only community that did that. San Jose is the only city that did that. The rest of the communities we cover here all ended up seeing a loss on the part of the proceeds for the sellers. So Morgan Hill down 3.8% from the same time last year, $1,471,644 versus $1,529,751 last year at the same time, for a net loss of $17,560 between expectations and what they actually got on average. So the average expectation of a seller versus what the seller actually ended up getting when the home sold. The big hit here, which is kind of an interesting one to note, is Gilroy. Now, they had a 2.8% drop. The average number was $1,123,521. Last year, $1,155,396. But if we think back, right, to what that average original list price was, it was $1.226 million for a net loss of $102,754 between expectations of what homes actually sold for in Gilroy. So that's pretty interesting, right? Because that implies a few things. That implies you know, a little bit more of negotiation room in here for a lot of these properties. A lot of it depends on where you are in terms of price banding, because in a minute we're going to talk about percent over or under asking price that homes are getting. And clearly, because of the numbers we just talked about in terms of the difference in expectations versus what homes sold for, despite the fact on average in every community that we're going to look at, homes sold for over asking price, there are clearly folks getting deals that represent lower numbers, right? All right. So let's go ahead and take a look at those ratios. So again, this is percent over under asking price. If the number is 100, that means that the seller got what they were asking for, what their list price was exactly. If they were asking $1 million, they got $1 million. If it's over 100%, whatever that overage is represents how much in addition to their asking price they got. Now, in Santa Clara County, that number was down overall by 1.4%, but it was still 104.7, meaning they got, on average in Santa Clara County, they got 4.7% over asking price. Now, that is not every single house. It does indicate a predominance of homes selling for over asking price, which implies multiple offers, right? Because there wouldn't be any other reason for multiple offers to happen. But last year it was 106.1, meaning last year at the same time we were seeing 6.1% over asking price. And that's an overall change of 1.4%. So the difference between 6.1 and 4.7 is 1.4. So that's the overall change from last year. But this is still strong. I would have expected us to see this. We'll see in a minute how we're performing historically, just month over month. But I would have expected this number to be a little bit lower, maybe not so much at the county level. But the numbers that follow, for the fact, for instance, that San Jose only sees a 0.9, less than a 1% deviation from last year. So 106.1 last year, 105.2 this year. I would have called for a greater decline in this number for San Jose than we got. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens in July. It's also interesting to note that we don't know, when we talked about pending sales, we don't know what the amount is of those offers. Did we see an uptick because there may have potentially been lower prices offered as we were exiting the sort of hot time of the market and sellers wanted to make sure they didn't lose out on that? I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see what the truth is behind that. But in any event, in San Jose, homes on average selling for 5.2% over asking price. In Morgan Hill, that number was 2.5% over asking price, a net decline of 1% from the same time last year when homes were selling for 3.5% over asking. And then in Gilroy, we saw a 3% decline, where last year they were selling for 4.9% over asking, and this year it was 1.9% over asking price. And if you go and you look at what actually sold in these communities, you're going to find a variation, right? It's not a predominance of selling over asking price. It is an awful lot of homes selling for asking or less, and then some higher priced homes in some price bands selling for more. So you as a buyer don't think, wow, any home I look at in San Jose, I'm going to have to offer 5% over asking price. That is just not the case. In the most desirable areas, in some communities, in some submarkets, absolutely. There are still a huge amount of demand. There are folks who really want to live in some of these areas. And I've worked with some buyers recently who had very much banner communities that they were interested in, where you would think it was 2018, 2019, given how much interest there is on the part of folks to buy those homes. But these are top shelf communities that are always in ridiculous demand for whatever reason. And there's usually a variety of different reasons for most of these communities. All right, next, let's take a look at days on market. Now we can see that we've across the board have increases, right? It is simply taking longer to get homes sold. But notice none of them are over 30 days, right? In many of them, we are at numbers that are pretty close, particularly Santa Clara and San Jose. We are pretty close to the quote, what I always have called the artificial number, right? To define what that means is, in many markets, agents will list a home, and in the description, particularly the private notes that only other real estate agents can see, they will say, we will not be considering any offers until such and such a date at such and such a time. This reflects that kind of thing, or at least close to it. Last year in Santa Clara County overall, there were 14 days to get a home sold. This year it's 17 days. That's a 21% increase. But still, once you're under 20 days, you're tending to be able to conclude that there are definitely areas with much higher interest. And of course, when you get the homes with the multiple offers that end up selling for over asking price, what you end up being able to conclude is that that those homes are selling for, those are the ones that are selling for under this number, right? So if 16 is the average, those are the ones that are tending to sell for in less time, in even less time, right? I just need to check something real quick here. Sorry. Okay, never mind. I'm good. So in San Jose, that was a 23% increase, 13 days last year, 16 days this year. Morgan Hill, 16 days last year, 23 days this year for a 44% increase. In Gilroy, it was 15 days last year, 21 days this year. Note the difference again between Morgan Hill and Gilroy. I know an awful lot of folks, when they're ranking communities in terms of desirability, make Morgan Hill a higher ranking one. And if we go strictly by sales price, that's absolutely true. But in terms of desirability, when you're blending financial concerns and inventory concerns and what you get for your money concerns, Gilroy is tending to win. And that is a reflection of how fast homes are selling and in the other numbers we see in terms of sellers willing to come onto the market and the amount of homes that are selling. Okay, next. Now, usually it takes a little bit of time for me to assemble the... Oh, wait, no, I'm sorry. We're going to do these first. I totally forgot about that. All right, so these are the looking back numbers, right? So this is just looking over our shoulder. We did year over year. Now we're going to focus on what are these numbers as trends so that we can try if we can figure out what's going to happen in the coming months. So this is total number of active listings. It has been gradually increasing since, we saw a decrease in December. We kind of bottomed out in December. And then as usual, January, February, March, April, we see an increase. Now, this is Santa Clara County numbers, so the highest volume of data, right? So more reliable, bigger numbers or larger sample size usually equals more reliable data. And we can see we've been in a steady increase really since February, where we had sort of the bottom out there, and then it sort of has gone up from there. If we look at the same time last year, we can see a big ramp up. December all the way till July was nuts, right? If you look at this, we sort of peak in June and July. But look at our peak. Look at how mild this peak is. Now, remember, last year was weird because in March of last year, we had the interest rates make their big flip into the higher range, which would absolutely boost inventory, right? As homes don't sell because interest rates are simply too high. But if we then look back at 2021, we can see we sort of peak there in July and then August, and then we start to decline from July, right? So June, July, maybe we see a peak. So we from here, we may see a continuing increase in overall inventory. And then as just looking for trends, we should expect to see a decline. So what do we do? How do we look in the crystal ball for total active listings, total inventory for July of 2023? I think we see it go up another little bit. I think that's our plateau, and then we start to go down from there with a big, not as big a drop as we saw in 2021, but a drop in 2023 as we hit those winter months, as we typically see, which is normal for that time of year, right? That's the seasonal influence. Okay, next, let's take a look at new listings. We can see that we sort of peaked in May and new listings declined in June when compared to just the previous month. If we look at how May and June tend to relate to each other, we can see that there was a drop between May and June of last year, an even more dramatic drop, which is pretty normal, and we tend to see that then lead to continuing dropping right up until the heart of winter and December, as folks don't want to deal with getting their homes sold. They don't want to list their home and have to deal with Thanksgiving and Christmas, having folks traipsing through their homes. If we look at 2021, we can see that we sort of peak. We see a pretty big peak there in April, and then May declines a little bit, and then June, and then July starts to go down a little bit. So again, when we're comparing just month to month, the trend tends to be a decline. So the expectation here, since in both the two previous years we saw a decline, I would expect us to see a decline in July from June, and then from there, we obviously got a little bit of a bump in September, but then a continuing drop right up until winter. So we are, as I've said before, we are now at the peak. We've been at the peak. We've seen the top of the mountain for 2023, and for right now, it's all a downhill move. Next, homes sold. Let's take a look at what we've got here, because between May and June, we saw a little bit of decline in the total number of homes sold. We got a nice big bump between April and May. Between May and June, a bit of a drop. If we look at June of last year, we can see that that was really a trough, right? June and July were the bottom of a trough after peaking in April. And that's one of the reasons why typically when we're talking about the peak of the year, this is one of the numbers I point to where the number of homes sold peaks in either April or May typically. If we look at April and May of last year, well, look at that. We had a peak in April, but then we also had an interesting peak in June. But also keep in mind we had the interest rate increase here. We didn't have that here, but then we got that boost. But the market was also very different in 2021. So what do we expect moving forward? Because remember, we don't see in let's see, April, May, June. We don't see that weird up then down move when we look at last year, right? June we see a peak with the month before being low. We started to see just a May, June drop. And if we look at June of last year, the June, July was flat. I would expect this to stay flat in terms of homes sold, maybe a little higher, because remember the pending number that we saw was an interesting increase for the same time last year. So if we look at the same time last year, where were we? The expectation would be that we see about the same number. So it wouldn't surprise me if we have a very similar curve to the same time last year in terms of total number of homes sold. So that I wouldn't expect an extreme drop, but I wouldn't expect an extreme increase. And then we may see a little bit of an uptick in the total number of homes sold as we go into August. But it wouldn't surprise me if it's also more mild than last year, if we get that kind of a big deviation at all. And then in terms of homes pending, we can see we had a decrease from last month. So between May and June, we had a pretty substantial drop. And if we look at last year, we can see that in June, between May and June, we had a drop last year as well, which kind of fits in. And then we had a continuing drop in July. So it wouldn't surprise me if this goes down, which would be normal for the season, right, as a seasonal influence. If we look at May and June of last year, it was relatively flat. But again, June and July, a drop in total number of pendings. So my guess is flat homes sold because of current pendings, but then dropping pendings, which will result in dropping solds in coming months. Does that make sense? Okay. Santa Clara County list price versus sales price. Again, this is original list price, so we're kind of comparing expectations. We can see that they've really come together, right, for a very long time, going all the way back to, what was it, July of 2022, which was kind of the last time these two numbers met. We saw expectations being far above, on average, what folks are actually getting in sales price. But we've seen them come together as sales price has sort of risen to meet expectations. And again, that's a seasonal thing, because if we look at last year, April, May, June, we can see that we sort of had that peak, right? May, June, and then July, a bit of a drop. And usually it's the same thing. Here we had a bit of a peak in April, May, and then June, July, another little very flat drop. But that's sort of the expectations, right? That's the season that we see these things happening. So where do we go from here? Well, if we look at June of last year, we can see that both average list price and average sales price dropped. So if we look at the year before that, we can see that average sales price was flat. Average list price was kind of flat with a bit of an increase. Wouldn't surprise me if we see the same thing. So these numbers might sort of just meet and level out for the next month. And then I would guess we start to see a decline in sales price as we head into the winter months, just because that's what tends to happen as we head into the second half of the year. In terms of percent of asking price, the trends here are really not hard to spot. We get a very clear view of what has been happening with this one. But what's interesting is, check it out. June is now the peak. If we take a look at where the peaks have been before, in 2022, the peak was in March, say March, April. But again, remember, that's because of interest rates. March interest rates took a huge jump, so we saw them negatively affect how much above asking price people were asking. It hung on for a little while simply because people kind of locked in their rates. So if we go back, we can see that last year, when interest rate changes were not in play, April was the peak. April and May were the two peak months, with jumping at the end of the year, which is a very not normal seasonal thing, right? A winter jump in this number. But we can see we kind of peaked here and then declined there a bit. But what we've seen is steady increases right on through till June. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. If I had to guess, I would say we're going to be relatively flat between June and July. These numbers may stay at around 104 or 4% above asking price on average, with a decline as we get out of July into August, which would tend to be normal, with our numbers bottoming out as we head into the heart of winter. Days on market. Now, we peaked right here in January of 2023. We've come right back down in June of 2023 to, I forget what the number was. It was 17 days or 18 days. I've got it down over here. I can look at it. 17 days in Santa Clara County. And again, we're almost, look at where we are. I mean, these are the numbers when, and remember, this is just coming out of winter, so that's why we're seeing this high number that tends to drop. But this is before crazy interest rates. This is when the market was very robust. But we're almost down to days on market numbers that go to being on par with 2021 prior to the interest rate increase. And then look at what happened here. We saw that dramatic drop in 2022 before the March change in interest rates, and then things just gradually, over the course of a couple of months, made a complete change to hit the peak that we had in December of 2022. All right, next, let's go ahead and talk price reductions. This is the percent of listings with reduced prices for June of 2023. And I've enhanced this a little bit. Last month in Santa Clara County, the number was 22.2. This month it's 22. So basically flat, no change. Year over year change is 66%. So it's 66% lower than it was a year ago. So 1 year ago, 66% more price reductions were happening in Santa Clara County. In San Jose last month, it was 18.8%. It's up a little bit to 20% this month, and that's a 73% drop from the same time last year. In Morgan Hill, 27.5 with an uptick to 32%. I think we called this one last month, if I'm not mistaken, because the Morgan Hill at that point was still had homes that were listed higher really than the market could support. So in order to take advantage of the market we're in now, it really needed to see a price reduction. So we had an uptick in the number of homes that had a price reduction. That's a 53% drop from the same time last year. And Gilroy, 20% last month, 25% of homes had a price reduction this month. And that's a 58% delta from the same time last year. But Gilroy is interesting because it's the price reductions that happen in Gilroy tend to be at the higher end instead of really spread out across different markets. The higher end homes are having more difficulty in Gilroy than the other price brackets, which I think makes sense, right? Because so many folks that are drawn to Gilroy aren't really looking for those higher price brackets. They're looking for stuff that if they could do the 3 million, 4 million, 2.5 million, whatever number there, they would probably still be looking in some place like Morgan Hill or South San Jose. So the fact that we've seen a decent segment of the market have to do price reductions, I think still makes sense despite the other numbers. All right. Well, that hits the big numbers for us. Let's see here. Now, I do have some news items we can hit. We're a little bit more than halfway through the show this morning. If anybody's got any questions, feel free to lay them out right there in the chat. I'm happy to ask any questions. If any of the data that we've taken a look at brings up any questions for you, I'd be more than happy to look into them for you. Or if you've got any other general market concerns, again, happy to try to answer those here on the live chat. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at some of the latest news, some things that I think might interest you, or at least might give you some good information as it relates to where the market's going to be going. And the first one I'm going to go ahead and hit here is one that I think matters for local folks, particularly if you're someone who wants to get that vacation home, or you're someone who wants to look in. One of the most popular areas is Tahoe. I know several folks who own a vacation home or a second home in Tahoe, and they spend half their time there. These are folks who tend to be in high tech, and they buy a place in Tahoe, and then they spend 1 week in Tahoe and 1 week down back in Silicon Valley, maybe doing in-person stuff if they have to. But what's interesting is so many folks are anticipating Lake Tahoe staying on this rip-roaring growth that the most recent numbers, I think, are interesting to note, that prices are down 6.8% in Tahoe year over year. And here's the chart to back that up. Median price year over year. Inventory is up. It's still down overall year over year, but it's up compared to last month, for instance. But prices are down. So instead of, look at how much growth you were seeing there. Now, these prices need to be down a while, I think, to accumulate greater benefits for folks who are potentially looking to buy. But this was the first sign of a softening market, right? And this interestingly goes all the way back to 2004. So I think this presents potentially an opportunity for you if you're someone who's always kind of had an interest in Tahoe. Would I start looking now? I think I'd go ahead and get a search going, I just to see if anything comes along that really sounds too good to be true, or just amazing. But I would keep an eye on this. If this is something that even interests you a little bit, this would be worth your time, I think, to just get a casual once a week update on what properties are available in that market and see if anything looks particularly interesting to you. Next, inflation continues easing in June, plus 3%. The headline inflation measure, which covers all goods and services, rose 0.2% in June. Any upward move is bad. It was up 3% from 1 year ago. So I'm not ready to celebrate this number. I don't think it's a number worth celebrating. Frankly, it is. It should. We need it to. I would love for it to go down. It needs to go down. The rate at which it increases needs to not just go down. The overall number just needs to go down. The bigger surprise was a much improved core inflation rate, a measure of price changes that ignores food and energy prices, which is useless to you as a person who eats and consumes energy, right? I mean, if you decide you're not going to eat anymore and you're not going to put gas in your car and you're not going to heat your house, I guess that number makes sense. But for those of us who live in the real world, that's a number that means nothing. Just the fact that it's volatile means nothing because we're all still paying it. Right? Whether it's volatile or not, we pay it. This measure dipped to 4.8 annual growth. Again, I don't want to see annual growth. At the very least, I'd love to see zero for a while, simply because we've earned zero for a while. Its slowest pace since October of 2021. More importantly, the 0.2% monthly increase is consistent with a 1.9 annual rate of change if sustained, the lowest since February of 2021. And these are always so interestingly phrased, right? Interest rates or inflation sucked in February of 2021. So comparing it to a time when things were more horrible is really not a comfort for me. Next, weekly housing trends data for the week July 8th. And if we want to compare this to sort of our own local reality and compare it to sort of our Santa Clara County numbers, median listing price continued to register down 0.2%. I don't do median. I think median is the number at which half of the homes were above and half were below a number. I do an average, which is you add up all of the prices, the list prices of homes, and you divide it by the total number of homes, which gives you the average price, which I think is a little bit more useful. But we had a 2.4% increase in original list price. And they had a 0.2% drop overall nationally. So I guess you could say countywide. But then when you take a look at the communities, we had about a 1% drop in San Jose. We had a 8.4% drop in Morgan Hill. We had a 3.1% drop in Gilroy. So in terms of the county overall, we're beating the national average in I guess a good way, if we consider that the right direction to move. But in terms of our local communities, not. We're performing less well than the overall. Next, 27%. From 1 year ago, listings, total number of new listings. In terms of new listings, we had a 27.6% drop in Santa Clara County overall. So really on par, frankly, with the national number. Active inventory declined by 5%. Our active inventory declined by 47.5%. So in terms of inventory numbers, we are completely burying the national number as it relates to that. So that's one that's interesting to note. And then sort of as a summary here, median price down 0.2, new listings down 27%, active listings down 5%, time on market up 13 days overall. And for us, the overall days on market is up not that much. So ours is probably closer to 9 days, 8 days, 7 days, really, increase. So we'll, in terms of how long homes are staying on the market, we're doing better than the national average. Freddie Mac mortgage rates jump approaching 7% despite cooling inflation. People, I'll tell you, when I'm talking to buyers and interest rates move or don't move, nobody is talking about specifically with inflation. If inflation cools or the rate inflation increases, changes by 0.2%, nobody is making their home buying decision based on that, right? So they talk about cooling inflation, but it's the teeniest of cooling. It's like noticing the difference in a room between 74 degrees and 73 degrees, right? So the idea that somehow this would supremely influence whether or not someone wants to get a loan, that is absolutely reaching for, I guess, the silver lining in what is really bad news. Next, we can talk a little bit about foreclosures. I think this one's interesting. Foreclosures have been artificially suppressed for a very long time, and we're finally starting to see that not happen anymore. But this goes all the way back to 2008. And I think it's also interesting that they don't go back further than that. Because remember, 2008, anything before 2008 was a much smaller number, right? We see 1,332,000 for 2008 in terms of January to June foreclosure activity. But it almost feels like they're trying to give a odd perception of what quote unquote normal is. Remember, 2008, we were almost well into it. We were at least a year into the craziness. So prior to that year, it would have been quite a bit less, right? And then we saw that peak in 2010. So interesting that they cut it off there. I would have loved to see more data there. I did do a little poking around and couldn't find older data, but that's the way it goes sometimes. But check it out here. So we bottomed out at 2021, and remember, all the stuff through here is artificial. 2020, as soon as we had COVID hit, all of the stuff had the brakes put on it. So, which has resulted in some homes being quote unquote in foreclosure for 1,200 days, right? And remember, a year only has 365 days. So that's like 3 years. And now we're starting to see increases, and we've got an increase in 2023 to 185,000 for ticking upward to close to pre-COVID levels. I think the odds are we see that increasing even more. Now, January to June foreclosure activity, properties with foreclosure filings. That's the same chart, is it? No, wait a minute. Yeah, I guess it is. Yeah, it is. Why they show me the same chart twice, I don't know. But then we go here. Let's see. Did I have any? I could have sworn I highlighted some stuff here. Average days to complete foreclosure. So here we go. And why is there such a jump right here? Well, because we have all the ones that we've had not make a step, right? When you put the brakes on and then you see these numbers decline during these quarters, right? Then you start to see a little bit of an uptick here, and then suddenly a big boost because the next step has been kicked off, right? So we're starting to see that get accounted for. States with the longest average foreclosure timelines for homes foreclosed in Q2 2023 were Michigan, Louisiana, New York, Hawaii, and Kentucky. And I've done tons of shows on the podcast where we really analyzed why some of these numbers are what they are. I forget what the term is. Judicial foreclosure, I think, is what it's called, which just completely extends it. And I know Florida, I believe, is a state that has judicial foreclosure, and New York is another one. So that's one reason why some of these get so extended in some of these locales. But I think we're in for a lot more foreclosures. I think we've had this number artificially suppressed for a very long time. And we're finally getting to a place where these are having to get dealt with. And this is the net result. Okay, top 10 housing markets with worst foreclosure rates, just to sort of continue the party of foreclosures here. According to the report, that figure is up 13% from the same time period a year ago and up 185% from the same time period 2 years ago. So this is properties with filings in the first 6 months. So remember what a filing is, right? In some cases, we have properties that filed maybe that delinquency notice, but never went anywhere and stayed there. What this implies is that those first steps, right, your delinquent step, was up 13% from the same period a year ago and up 185% from the same period 2 years ago, which would be a reflection of, in their minds, accounting for the COVID period, right? So the thing is there may be a ghost inventory of potential foreclosures. And what I mean by ghost inventory is that despite the fact that they've been delinquent, they may not have even been given a notice relating to that. So there may be a lot of delinquency out there that is eluding statistical tracking because it's simply not being reported. It's not, that thing isn't happening. That initial step isn't occurring. We had some weird shenanigans with that stuff way back in terms of shadow inventory when homes were foreclosed on, in terms of properties that weren't then getting put back onto the market that were being held by banks because they didn't want to liquidate them at a loss. And this, I think, is a sort of different flavor of the same problem. The states that saw the greatest increases in foreclosure activity compared to a year ago in the first half of 2023 included Maryland, Oregon, Alaska, West Virginia, and Arkansas. And interestingly enough, aside from Oregon, none of these states really are blips on the chart in terms of property or areas that we've looked at, in terms of interesting stats that we've seen come out of different states. The report also noted that among 223 metro areas with a population of at least 200,000, those with the highest foreclosure rates in Q2 2023 were Atlantic City, New Jersey, Lakeland, Florida, and remember, stuff that's the news items that have churned about Florida have always been booming, right? Well, for Lakeland, it's in the top 10 for starting foreclosures. Cleveland, Ohio, next, Columbia, South Carolina, and then again, Jacksonville, Florida. So 2 Florida communities. And actually, Florida appears on several of these lists. Let's see. The mid-year 2023 foreclosure report to uncover the complete list of the top 10 U.S. metros with the worst foreclosure rates in Q2 2023. Check out how much Florida dominates this, and we can look at the chart. New Jersey, Lakeland, Winter Haven, Florida, Cleveland, Ohio, Columbia, South Carolina, Jacksonville, Florida, Palm Bay, Melbourne, Titusville, Florida, Elkhart, Goshen, Indiana, Ocala, Florida, Chicago, Naperville, Elgin, Illinois, Indianapolis, Wisconsin, and then Orlando, Kissimmee, Sanford, Florida. So look at all that action. Look at everything that's happening in Florida. Florida is dominating a bad number list. So, and I'm somebody who's definitely supported the idea of look closer into communities in Florida for investment purposes. I don't necessarily shy away from that advice. I think it depends on the market you're looking at. But I find it very interesting that we're seeing this kind of foreclosure problem. And one number I would love to see is how many of these foreclosures are individuals, right? They're resident owners or properties that someone bought, because there was such a balloon in prices in Florida homes over the last couple of years. I can't help think that investors made bad moves in purchases and now find themselves in a scenario where they can't sustain that investment and they're going into foreclosure as an investor. So I'd love to see that breakdown. Again, I did a little bit of poking around. I tried to follow their links, but couldn't find out what the breakdown was of those. What were these owner-occupied or not owner-occupied properties that were dominating these foreclosures? Because I'm willing to bet we'd see a pretty substantial hit to the investor community in terms of some of these purchases that have been made and turning into foreclosures. Okay, next, surprising migration trends show movers are going to these markets. Now, I want to point out where this data is coming from. It's coming from rent.com. It's not coming from moving truck rentals. It's not coming from the IRS. So this is always a source that I find slightly less reliable, just a little bit, just a little bit less substantial in terms of when I see stuff from the IRS. Nobody is more on you in terms of acquiring data than the IRS. So this is just about evaluating trends of what people are searching for on a site called rent.com. So take this one with a slight grain of salt, but if you want to try to get some broader trend feel vibes from this, I don't think that's unreasonable. It now appears that more residents are leaving rather than entering the South. Now, for those of you, again, who've been listening to my podcast forever, And it's almost been going forever, since January of 2007. We've talked about the South. The South was a big destination. The South is a huge destination for investors. If you go and you start looking for real estate podcasts, or folks telling you where to invest, or if you look at past data about where the most growth was and where the most rents were doing the best, those types of things, the South was it. Everybody should be going to the South. I did an interview on the podcast with someone who was buying mobile home parks in the South and investing that way. Let's see. The Rent.com first quarter 2023 migration report is based on data from January, February, and March. Researchers measured inbound and outbound leads based on user interest in properties and combined the numbers to get a lead delta for each geographical area. A negative lead delta shows more people are interested in leaving the area than moving to the area. So again, this does not reflect necessarily action, but it does reflect people researching things. So and because of past experience I've had with how data gets accumulated and massaged, I don't see a direct one-to-one correlation between looking at potentially relocating and then physically actually doing it, which is one reason why I like moving company data and IRS data, right? When you move and you change your address, the IRS knows. And if it changes from one state to another, that's pretty solid data, right? None of the metro areas with the highest inbound lead deltas were in the West. Let's see. It can be helpful to see where rental demand is the highest as you're researching new markets. And I think that's absolutely valid. If you're someone who's looking at jumping into potentially becoming an investor, buying yourself an investment property that you're going to do long-term hold and rent, all data is good data. But again, understanding the reliability of that data is also key to making good decisions, right? So outbound migration, and some of these are a little bit surprising. Maine leads the list. I know bupkis about Maine, other than most of Stephen King's books take place in Maine. Isn't that right? 57% drop. Vermont, West Virginia, Illinois, where Chicago is, totally makes sense. It actually surprises me that Illinois isn't higher on this list. And then Montana, because we've actually looked at data where Montana was seeing a lot of growth from data that's a little bit more reliable, from like tax data. Outbound migration by metro: St. Louis, Missouri; Atlanta; Chicago, of course. Again, surprised that's not higher on the list. Denver, not sure why that's a thing. Charlotte, North Carolina. Charlotte is actually one of the corners of the technology triangle there, right, that they've got going. So there was actually a lot of growth in those markets a few years ago. So again, a little bit surprised to see a big drop there. Inbound migration, where people are going in terms of states. New Jersey boggles my mind. New Jersey has crazy taxes. Delaware, don't know a lot about Delaware. North Dakota, don't know a lot about North Dakota. Louisiana, Rhode Island. Inbound migration by metro. See, and remember, wasn't something... See, there's Atlanta. Atlanta is one of the biggest outbound migrations, but isn't Augusta literally just a little bit southeast of Atlanta? Or am I completely mixed up? Anyway, so Augusta had a lot of inbound migration, which could be a factor of the natural migration thing we've talked about with being able to work from home, right? Maybe folks decided, I'm out of Atlanta and I'm going to go to Augusta, which is, sorry, I don't know better, but is Augusta more of a suburb of Atlanta? Harrisburg, Lancaster, Lebanon, York, Pennsylvania; Madison, Wisconsin; Waco, Temple, Bryan, Texas; and Knoxville, Tennessee are all in the inbound migration. I remain a fan of Tennessee without any logical reason. Well, okay, I have a couple of logical, but they're not super rational. It's strictly numbers based. So I got super excited about Chattanooga, Tennessee, because the city put in fiber throughout the entire city. Just boom, the city just did it, right? It wasn't some cable company came and did it as a thing. It was the city decided to do it and pay for it. And they had this real renaissance of high tech. And that just sounded awesome to me. So I really started looking at the numbers. And for a couple of podcasts years ago, when they first did this, I don't know, maybe 2015, 16, 17, I'm not sure when it happened, I was all about it. There was some beautiful water view because there's a beautiful river that comes right along the city, and some really beautiful views you can get. And I was like, man, that would be a place to invest. And also amazing duplexes. You could get some instant multifamily stuff going on. But anyway, so whenever I hear Tennessee now, give it the same love that I was giving to Chattanooga. And I'm not sure why I do that, but I did it. So sorry. All right, this is going to sound like a weird one, right? But if you're going to look at finance, if you're going to look at the world of what's going on with things, remember last time, right, when we had the big downturn, 2007, 8, 9, there were all kinds of different dominoes in that. You know, there were foreclosure dominoes, there were home price dominoes, there were people abandoning their homes dominoes, and then there was the car market collapse domino, right? And when it happened, whenever the market takes a big dump, one thing you can count on is a ton of Mercedes and BMW cars coming available as surrendered leases because of the shrinkage of the number of real estate agents, which is always, I don't know. It's not good to joke about that, but you can always tell, right? If suddenly there's a lot of lease surrenders or a lot of those cars coming into the market for sale, you know something's happening with real estate agents. And in this case, this year, huge drop in the number of real estate agents because there just aren't enough deals out there. So a lot of agents are just dying on the vine, which is fine. However, I would love to say that equals better agents. The ones who can survive stuff like this tend to be the better agents. As a survivor of this, I would love to say that means I'm awesome. I think I'm awesome for other reasons, but that's not a thing. Unfortunately, I know amazing agents who are superbly excellent at the job of being a real estate agent that just aren't as good as getting people to sign the listing agreement, right? Or getting exposed. They're fine with being able to pitch what they do, but their marketing of themselves is poor because they don't enjoy marketing themselves. Whereas the ones that have totally got that whole thing going on, and we could have a conversation about that if anybody's interested, but every year I do, usually around November, December, January, when things are slowing up a little bit, I'll sit back, I'll look at the top, quote unquote, top producing agents, the ones that advertise themselves as top producing agents, and I'll do some number crunching. I will look for how good did they perform? Did they tend to get their clients more money or less money on average than everybody else? And almost universally, those top performing agents, they may have sold the most homes or sold the largest dollar value amount of homes over the course of the year, but they performed the worst when it comes to all the metrics that you use to actually measure how good an agent is, at least what I use to measure. Agents are going to come at you and say, I sold X number of homes last year. Well, you shouldn't care. That number should mean nothing to you. What you should care about is, on average, did your home sell for over or under asking price? How fast did they sell? On average, did your homes sell for more or less than the average in the market where that home was, right? All numbers easy to track, but no agent tracks it because it's an actual metric to determine whether or not they did a good job. And no agent wants that. When I first started again, we're in the weeds. I apologize. When I first started my brokerage firm, I did an event. I wanted to recruit agents, similarly minded. And my pitch was, we'll have a scorecard where this is how we measure your success. And it's how satisfied you're. It's a evaluation. It's a customer satisfaction score that you get, which is obviously just qualitative. It's just how well did you think they did on X, Y, and Z? But then it's the numbers. Here's what we listed the price home. Here's what it sold for. On average in that market, the homes were selling for 2% above asking price. In our case, we got 4% above asking price. And in terms of just net average price we got for homes in that market, the overall number was higher too, right? So it wasn't just that we had underpriced the home in the listing. It was that we actually got our seller more, right? So these are all numbers they're absolutely out there. Nobody wants to talk about them. So I did my pitch. And of course I had to have free donuts and coffee because that's the only way to get real estate agents into a room. Once my pitch was over, it was like crickets. Nobody was down to be judged on real numbers relating to their performance as a real estate person. And it was one of the most eye-opening things ever. Didn't get a single person, A, that wanted to do it, or B, that I would want to be on my team out of that experience. And literally over the course of dear Lord, I guess it'll be 20 years this year that I started my brokerage. I've only hired 2 agents into my brokerage. Because they were down to be judged by that criteria. So anyway, all right. Why do I bring up coming back to the other shiny thing, wholesale used car prices decreased 4.2% in June, down 10.3% year over year. So why am I even bringing this up? Well, one, if you're someone who's interested in potentially buying a car, I think that the second half of 2023 is going to be opportunity for you. Figure out what kind of car you want. If you're someone like me who drives a car and drives it till the wheels fall off, and just take really good care of it, and it lasts you a decade or more. And I'm coming up on a decade on my current car. Yeah, I'm coming up on a decade on my current car. It's time, right? So it also happens to coincide with a time when prices are likely to get really good. So I might even step into one of the classic real estate agent vehicles, right? It's almost like the uniform of the day for an agent to have a BMW or a Mercedes. But I'd love to go for something a little bit more awesome and maybe a little bit more utility-based. Mine's a four-door sedan. I might go with an SUV. Who knows? That's obviously a different conversation. But why do I bring this up? Well, number one, as I said, it looks like it could be a good opportunity for you to get yourself a car at a really good price compared to what it's been at for the last couple of years. Second, think about the news headlines you've seen relating to cars, and then think about the overall debt profile of folks who bought a car in the last 2 or 3 years where their average car payment is over $1,000 a month, where they were paying crazy bloated prices not only for new cars but for used cars, where there were cases where people were selling cars in 2021 and 2022 that were used, that were selling for more than those people paid for those cars brand new. So think about that debt portfolio, and then think about a scenario where people who have paid a crazy amount of money for their car, and then the value of that car takes a precipitous drop. Now, maybe people won't even notice. I think people tend to notice this stuff more on a house than they would on a car. But when they see other people being able to buy now the same car brand new with the same or lower payment than what they got for their car when they bought it used, how does that work out? Now, if the mindset transfers, what we end up with is people buying a new car at the new lower prices and then no longer making the payment on the old car. They surrender the car. And that makes this number go even lower, right? Because all that does is feeds the wholesale car market. You get a higher inventory. With higher inventory comes lower prices, right? And the demand isn't there already. So then you're just boosting that. So I'd love to see how that plays out. I know there's an awful lot of car market-focused folks on YouTube and whatnot, but I think this is an interesting thing that reflects a challenge to the debt profile of folks that could potentially negatively impact credit and financial issues, and could potentially leak into, I don't think this is going to, unlike the real estate market, which can clearly kick into a major downturn that affects all other markets, I'm not sure that a but a huge drop in car prices or car indebtedness can have the same effect in more of a mushroom cloud kind of scenario. I don't see it negatively impacting housing markets in a huge way, but it's an element of the debt profile that we need to keep track of, I think. If I'm wrong, let me know. I'd love to get a comment from somebody who thinks I'm completely climbing up a tree here. But if you think that's something that's an interesting thing to note, I'd be with you. But the last thing I'd leave here is, despite the fact that this is true, and I continue to think that we're in a scenario where some interesting opportunities might be available for folks in the future in terms of getting a great price on a car, look at where the number is. It's still way up here. And if we were to try to normalize this without this crazy bump from 2019 to 2023, the number should be right around here somewhere, right? And in my mind, it's going to go there. It's just a question of how fast. So we'll see. We're going to, and I think at some point here in the near future, we're going to stop fighting inflation by hiking interest rates. And I think we're going to start fighting recession, which means we lower interest rates. It really depends on how aggressively we hit that one, though. All right. So just throwing that out there. It's just something to think about. Next, this is a local thing I wanted to hit. Santa Clara County parks are open for free on July 29th. So that's just 14 days away. And I wanted to share this with everyone because that's a big deal, right? Being able to go and enjoy the parks without having to pay for them, I think is a fun way to spend a day. So head on out on July 29th. You'll be able to explore any of these parks without having to pay a price for that, without having to pay the entrance fee. So I thought I'd share that with everyone. Next, I thought I'd hit what mortgage rates are at. Not at a great place, right? If we take a look at, this is the 52-week spread. So it's highest it's been in the last 52 weeks was 7.37, the lowest 5.05. and it's actually up 0.02% for the 30-year fixed, I still strongly suggest getting a 30-year fixed. I don't see the benefit of getting a adjustable rate mortgage. I mean, look at that. It's higher. It's higher than a 30-year fixed. So so continue to focus, I think, on fixed. And the other part of it is as I mentioned before, at some point interest rates are going to go down. When they do, you can refinance and remain at a fixed rate. But I think with the uncertainty that faces us, if I'm throwing out advice, if I'm just making suggestions, consider this just my opinion, not legal advice of any kind. But if there's one expense I would want fixed, in other words, today is the same amount I'm going to pay for this roof over my head. The price today is the same thing I'm going to pay in 6 months. Then getting that fixed rate loan is the way to go. And then just keep track of what interest rates are doing. And, totally shameless segue. My HomeBot AI tool, if you subscribe to it, will give you an alert. One of the things it does is when you go and you visit it once a month, if you choose to visit it once a month, it gives you a rundown of, does it make sense for you to refinance? And if it's green, it indicates you'll save money every month doing it. If it's red, it won't. So go check that out. Go to soldbyrobert.com, enter your address, top left. You'll get the usual stuff. This is what your home is worth this month, given other homes on the market, right? The automatic estimation of your home's value. But you'll also get the tools I'm talking about that give you a way to research whether or not you should consider refinancing, what your equity position is, what will happen to your mortgage if you were to contribute an extra $100 a month to the principal. A lot of great tools. So feel free to check that out. But I thought it would be fun to get specific. So here we are with, if we assume you're buying a home for $1.1 million with 20% down, what would interest rates be if you were buying a home in Morgan Hill? And I realized the average price was what? Was it 1.4? So we'll tweak that up to 1.4. Wow, and look at that. See, and you can see the difference here. Note we did a 1.1 or 1.2, and suddenly a couple of loans disappeared, right? And I'm seeing that more and more. Let's see here. Let's go back to 1.2. Yeah, look at that. See, more. But let's take a closer look at these because these are nuts. The sponsored ones are obviously always at the top of the list. I always like to scroll down to the one that just says lowest monthly. And just since I did this morning, right, I ran these numbers this morning, but just literally 10 minutes before I started the show. So at 9:45, 9:35, I ran these numbers. This number, this fee, has gone up by $1,000 just since today, right? So in addition to having a 5.784 interest rate, which is fine, but look how much you're paying to get that interest rate down. The fees are $16,800, and when you're done, your payment, after making a 20% down payment of $240,000, your payment is $5,526. That's freaking crazy. Absolutely insane. If we take a look at a refinance, do we want to see if it's a refinance? Let's again say your home's worth, say, 1.3, 1.2. No idea what your current mortgage might be. But again, look at all these. These are crazy. And if you're someone who has financed earlier, right? Like some of us are very lucky. I feel blessed to have, I think, a 3.2% loan. I have clients that we managed to lock in at, say, 2.5, 2.7% loans. And one reason why I also wanted to show this is one reason why sellers don't want to sell. If you're a seller who's considering selling your home, you realize I have to buy another home. So what I find is for folks who don't want to leave the area, that want to continue to stay here, that just want to downsize, they're just not doing it. They're saying, why would I do it? When my payment, I would buy a smaller house and I would end up paying more per month than I'm paying now for this bigger house because of the interest rate. Why would I do that? The only folks where this makes sense is they have enough equity where when they sell it, they could literally buy for cash the next house. And there's far fewer folks in that boat than you would think. Despite the fact that the news headlines tell you how much amazing equity folks have, particularly here in Santa Clara County, there are not a lot of folks who are in that boat who would then be able to take all that money and just put it all down on the next house. So I know in conversations I have with folks who are considering listing their homes, one of the first things that comes up is what are interest rates doing right now? Because if I sell now, I have to buy now. And that's a huge deal. That the amount you're paying in interest is so different because I have this existing 2-point whatever or 3-point whatever loan. Why would I want to give that up? So, okay. All right, folks. I hope that has been at least a little bit useful for everyone. The goal here is always to try to answer any questions you might have, but also leave you with more information on the table than I take up with your time. Always the goal with the podcast, with the market videos that I do. So feel free to check those out. If you have any, I don't see any questions here on the stream. We're all good. If you'd like to check out my YouTube channel or check out the podcast, and I do these every month on the third Saturday of every month. We do one of these things so that you guys can get questions answered or at least get an overview of what's going on with the markets. You can find out all the information on that at my website at soldbyrobert.com. And you can see all the different ways to subscribe to the podcast if you just want the audio version. There's also a video version of it on YouTube, along with all the other videos that I contribute to YouTube on a pretty regular basis. All right. Thanks for joining me, folks. I hope you enjoyed your coffee and real estate chat today, and I look forward to talking to you all next month. Have a good one.